bit of a verbal heads up that that's happening. These sessions are uploaded to our YouTube channel. If there gets to a questions and answer stage and there's something you'd rather not be included in the recording, do just let me know and we can sort of edit that out before it goes public. But generally, that should be fine. So I'm pleased to introduce our speakers this morning, who are going to talk to us about the East Midlands Youth Inclusion Forum. I won't introduce them on their behalf, but today we have with us Joe, Mark, Paul and Jerry. So I'll hand over to them and let them speak to you.
Hi everybody, my name is Mark Rayner. I work on the change programme for the Department for Education with my colleague Paul. We actually cover the North East, East Midlands and Yorkshire and Humber regions, and I also sit on the LSEC National Programme Board as well, and I'll explain our involvement in the Youth Inclusion Forum shortly.
Shall we all introduce us?
Yes, I think. Yeah.
So I'm Professor Geraldene Codina and I work at the University of Derby and I'm the principal investigator for this research project. I'll hand over to Joe, who can then hand over to Paul.
Hi, I'm Joe Tolley. I work at the University of Derby on projects that centre the voice of children and young people in practice and policy, but a large part of my work is chairing the Inclusion Forum.
And morning everyone, Paul Cunningham at Department of Education, and as Mark has already sort of mentioned, working in the change programme delivery team across those three same areas.
Thanks, Paul. So I'll just start and just provide the context. So next slide, please. I feel like Chris Whitty all of a sudden from several years ago now. You'll have heard mentioned a couple of times this morning the change programme. So basically just to say that this programme started a year, 2.5 years ago now, and it came out of what was then the Green White Paper around SEND and alternative provision, which resulted in something called the SEND and AP Improvement Plan, which some of you may be familiar with. But basically what that set out was basically a test and learn program. So we had quite a unique opportunity, I guess, as a department to test things that we thought might help improve the system as it stood, and basically rather than just kind of sit in a room dreaming these things up, after talking to everybody, was actually right, let's actually try these in real world contexts. So we've been testing a number of reforms across 32 local authorities. They're a complete mix. Some are small, some are large, some are coastal, some are rural, some are city, and basically we've been testing a number of things that we think might improve things, and hopefully the outcome of that will be reflected in some of the reforms that will be coming out in the new year. I guess the key thing in terms of the kind of youth voice and young people's voice was around how do we basically hear more about their voice, but I think a key shift which you'll notice there is, and you'll have picked up, is around inclusion. So we had a change of government, as you'll be very well aware, last year, and essentially there's now a big shift towards inclusion. So what do we mean by inclusion? How can we create more inclusion, and particularly around mainstream education? So essentially that's kind of a big shift that we've seen over the last kind of 6 to 12 months. So part of the change programme underpinning principles is that in order to test things properly, we needed to work in partnership with all those providing services to children across education and health and care, and to collaborate with those to whom the services are provided. So we've been doing a lot with parents, carers, as well as children and young people across the 9 English regions through those 32 local authorities. And basically the idea has been to kind of understand and identify what the barriers to inclusion are, particularly from the viewpoint of children and young people, and basically to look at how we can start to change some of the challenges that they found through their education and their life experiences as well. So again, it's difficult to kind of measure inclusion and a starting point, but we now have a direction of travel, and we're starting to look at different local areas, some of the brilliant things that are going on, and how can we improve and bottle some of that stuff that we can then share across the country, and essentially looking at where we can improve the experiences and therefore the life chances and opportunities for children and young people. A key thing, I guess, is which will come out of this here is just understanding their perspective, and also particularly around mainstream education. It was around improving confidence of families. So I think that there is I think it's nearly 60% actually of children currently within EHCP are within mainstream settings. So it's how can we help settings to kind of increase that percentage. So that was the kind of change program in essence, and the fact that the voice of children and young people has to be central to anything that we kind of look at, propose and test. So next slide, please. Thank you very much. So yeah, I've covered some of these things, but basically it's really important that we understand the lived experience of the system that will then help us look at redesigning the system and the services that we provide, and obviously the policy development that goes along with that. Co-production has been a fundamental principle of the Code of Practice and Code of Practice since before 2014. And we do know all the evidence suggests, and again, we get feedback from children, young people, parents, carers, and their kind of key partners and stakeholders, that actually meaningful cooperation is vital to improve these experiences of all children, young people and their families. And it kind of then focuses on the work that's been happening here. So the East Midlands local authorities have come together and worked on the Young Researchers, Young Voices programme between April 2022 and March 2025. So actually started before the change programme came in. But what we've allowed or utilised or been able to do is use some of our funding to actually kind of build on that work and develop a youth inclusion forum, which you'll find out about today. So again, the key thing there is hearing the views and experience of young people and children, and understanding how and what systems and structures we can best put in place to kind of get those views and experiences and kind of take them on board in an articulate and meaningful way. And where we talk at the potential there, so just to let you know, we're working with our colleagues. We currently have a national participation team. They work with organisations such as Kids and Flair, but we also understand, and myself and Paul have been working across our three regions, actually the regional voice and getting the voice of the widest range possible of children, young people is really, really important. So that's kind of the context and background to some of the work that you're just about to hear about. So I'll pass on now to Jerry.
I think there is one more slide.
Was it? Oh, sorry. Sorry. Yeah, just to say that obviously, this is all part of the change program, the testing and learning, and what we'll be doing with the outcomes of the work that's going on and continues to go on is basically we need to work together to understand these things and come up with improvements. So that's kind of it in a nutshell from us. Thank you, Jerry.
Fabulous. Next slide, please. So I want to tell you a little bit about the work that we've been doing as which Paul and Mark in the Department for Education through the change programme, as they said, have been funding. So we were really interested in working with the 10 local authorities in the East Midlands, and in particular their local area voice groups. And so we, working with the Department for Education and other colleagues, we wanted to put together the idea that those 10 groups in our region could actually come together regionally, leaders from those groups. And when I say leaders, yes, that would be a local authority lead, but ideally a young person lead as well. So to bring together those 10 groups so that they can learn from one another in that sort of, I'm kind of talking you through that triangle. So in that regional element, that everybody comes together in one place and they benefit from listening to and learning from what everyone else has been doing. And if we can start pulling together some kind of regional young people's voice, explaining what's happening in the East Midlands, we then can start to give put some messages up about the East Midlands to a national audience like the Department for Education, etc. And so that's what we've been putting together. It's we talk about it a bit like a parent carer forum. So it's rather like a parent carer forum, but this is sort of the focus for children and young people. So it's the Children and Young People's Forum, or we've been calling it the Youth Inclusion Forum. So in terms of what it's all about, that's kind of its structure that we've got in our minds. But we're wanting to share and promote good practice so that all the different regions can learn from one another. We're hoping to promote a culture of action planning. So we're really clear that this is not, there's brilliant youth groups out there that are hearing young people's voices and all sorts of other things in our regions. But this is trying to really help young people feed their voices into those strategic boards that are running in each local authority. So in Derby, for example, that's called the Local Area Inclusion Partnership Board, and every area's got its own board in one way or another. So how do those young people's voices make it into that board? How are they making a strategic difference across their area? And how can we support them as a region to do that? So it's that really meaningful way of doing that. And what we're also hoping is that longer term, as a region, we can start thinking about what we want to work on that is specific to our region across the East Midlands. So that's what this is all about. Next slide, please.
So as Harry's already said, we're working with the 10 local authorities in the East Midlands. Each were given funding to ensure that their group was either established or further embedded into the local area board. We meet as a region. We meet the forum 4 times a year, but crucially, we know that the representatives that come from each group, they are representatives of their group. So we also have connections meetings to really engage all members of each local area group into the work of the forum, and so that they can hear this regional work as well. We meet with the local authority leads 1 to 6 times a year, just to try and support them, find out where they're at, and progress their work, and that kind of embedding that voice into the local area. We've just had our 3rd meeting. So the first meeting of the forum was really an introduction to what the forum was and what we were hoping to achieve, and also an opportunity for it was mainly practitioners there. There was a few young people, but it was an opportunity for them to discuss where they were at in terms of their existing practice. In July we had more young people, which was great to see, and this really did focus on introduction to the Lundy model and what co-production was, because we realised that everybody was doing co-production, but not necessarily in the same way, and didn't really have like a standardised definition of what co-production was, and it also gave us an opportunity to for the groups to update us on where they were. The last meeting, which was last Saturday, there was much more young people. They we worked on a co-production workshop that was based on the 4 principles of the Lundy model, and it really gave the young people an opportunity to say what participation and co-production meant for them, and with that feedback and with their ideas, we'll be going into the 4th meeting, which is in March, that really looks at handing the forum over to them. It's really not our forum, it's theirs. So what work do they want to do? How do they want their voices to be heard? So we'll be developing a co-production charter to really underpin what behaviours they want to see within the forum, and we'll also be focusing on the terms of reference as well as planning for the year ahead. And I think I'm handing over back to Joey.
Yeah, next slide, please. Thank you. So when we started in April, we wanted to make it clear that nobody, whatever anybody's group was doing, whatever each local authority was doing, it couldn't really be wrong, and we didn't expect to find the same thing and the groups run in the same way. Because if we just look at that little bit there from chapter 4 of our existing code practice, it talks about you do need to engage your young people. You might set up a forum or a range of forums. You might be in a range of settings and circumstances. You could be using surveys, social media, etc. But we are wanting to do it independent of children's parents. So within that really broad framework, we really anticipated that we would find different things across different regions. So at the start of the project in April, when we began with the local authorities, we found that 6 local authorities in our region had got a group, or that they met with groups to gather the voices of children and young people. And that's not to say that the other 4 weren't, but they weren't so defined in a group. And actually, when we look at those groups, some of them started as far back as 1996 or 2008, and then you can see those that have come in post the current code. Again, looking at those groups, they had some common priorities that we found. So they were regularly looking at transport accessibility, health and well-being, preparation for adulthood, inclusive education and employment opportunities. And of the 6, 5 of them had a really defined group for hearing the voices of children and young people. So by that, it's a group where the young people come together in one place. They know they're members of that particular group, and they're thinking about activities that they might that they would like to do in their area. So one group, for example, had already created a guide for not putting your foot in it with health professionals and helping health professionals to engage with them. So activities that they've been doing. The other group, the 6th group that was more clearly defined, they'd gone for what we've referred to as a distributed model. So it was one of our more rural regions in the East Mids, and instead of everybody coming together, a member of the local authority was going out to different groups to hear their views. So if that member wanted to know about how children experienced wheelchair services, then they went out to the wheelchair service users and spoke to them. So it was a different model. It wasn't centralised, it was outwards. The 5 groups that were meeting regularly, they tended to meet somewhere between 6 times a year to twice a month. And all of the groups tended to have some social time, and of those 5, the priorities were set by the young people. Next slide, please. Over to you, Joe. You all right, Joe? Talk through the first bit while Joe's joining us. Is that what you're on mute, Joe? Oh, you come good. Okay, right. I'll talk through for a bit. If that's okay, Joe. I think she's saying yes. Okay. So in April at the beginning, we found that Different groups are recruiting people in different ways. Chip in at any point you want, Jo, and I'll just stop talking, okay? Oh, okay, right, I'll carry on for a bit. So we found that those groups are recruiting in different ways, but they were mainly recruiting through special schools or parent carer forums or youth services to get their membership. Decision making for those 5 or 6 groups was predominantly, for the 5 groups, sorry, was predominantly youth-led and co-produced. And one thing that those groups were really focused on was feedback loops. So they were thinking a lot about how could they, wait, Jo, I'm on feedback loops and I'm going to hand straight over.
Sorry, I muted myself in a completely different way and then couldn't get off mute, so apologies.
Have you back.
Yeah, so the groups that the 5 groups that were distributed really valued a feedback loop and were working towards that. So often, you know, visitors will come to these groups and they'll ask children and young people for their opinion, but won't then feedback. And that's really, really important to children and young people if they're going to be sharing their views. What is that professional do with their views, and what difference has their voice made? And that really helps their priorities to move along and feel more meaningful. In terms of influencing strategy, some of the groups had priorities such as transport, so that may be involved speaking to scrutiny and working with the transport companies to make meaningful change, such as one of the groups just been able to get a new wheelchair bay on the buses so that it becomes more accessible. But other groups and other priorities look at a broader sense of improvements such as gender awareness or better employment opportunities, and they work often in collaboration with other services to make those changes.
Thanks, Jo. And for those feedback loops, what they were finding was that if professionals were coming back in, that was a strategy that worked quite well, to tell them how they'd been getting on, or even that some groups had got priorities and then they reviewed their priorities to tie into that. Jo, sorry, I threw you straight back in there and you had no idea what I'd said. So next slide, please. So moving forward, so those are our groups, and they began, and that's where we began in April, and where we sort of found all those different groups and where they were at. So over the last 6 or so months, bringing the groups together across the East Midlands has allowed lots of idea sharing. So some of those groups have now developed. So across certain regions, they've had the benefit of hearing how the other 6 or so groups have been doing things. And one thing that we've talked a lot about is, and Paul referenced it and Mark at the beginning, with how you hear wider voice. How do you make sure that you get out into your mainstream schools and hear their voices, and you're not particularly focused on special school voices as an example? So taking all that on board, those groups that set up from April onwards, they've tended to look out to their region to see what youth groups are already there. And in 2 instances actually, they've taken a lead from those youth groups and then brought them together as a disability group that's particularly focused. And then they've set themselves up in that way. So they've managed to try and capture wider voice whilst coming in to a sort of more centralised model. So in a way, what they're doing is they've looked at the best of what's already there, those centralised models and those wider models, and tried to pull a hybrid together. For those groups that were already in existence, they've been really focused on sustainability, because one of the challenges with youth voice groups is that young people grow up. And this is a good thing, But of course, you just about get somebody into the group and then you've got them ready and they're really working really well. And then suddenly they're 25 and technically they're older at an older age group than this group is particularly focused on. So, you know, this whole thing focuses on 0 to 25, but, you know, typically it's 11 to 25 in terms of young people. So how do you create sustainability? And lots of different groups have been thinking about how older members who've left the group can mentor and keep that bit going, because that level of attrition is brilliant, but it happens much faster than you might imagine. So I've already mentioned wider voice. So as our established groups have been and new groups have been thinking about wider voice, they've started to develop digital tools, some apps for gathering wider voice. They've had focus groups and they've used surveys, various different events. And they've even, certain groups have been particularly focused on those children that might get missed off, for example, like children missing education or those in hospital, and they've been really interested in how they gather those children's voices. The priority themes are just the kind of things that you would expect, and a continuation of what was already happening. So you've got education and healthcare plans in there, independence, training, perhaps a new one that you might not have expected, but was how you can, in terms of preparation for adulthood and preparation into employment, the other side of that is training professionals and businesses to be inclusive and to work in an inclusive way. And then also there's been a real big focus on genuine inclusive approaches. So this has really been all about, though, and Joe's going to talk about this a little bit more in the next slide, but this bit has been about how a youth voice group that's focused on inclusion connects out with its wider youth voice groups. So, for example, a focus on mainstream, getting into mainstream schools. Because of the way most of the groups recruited, there tended to be a focus on special schools. And so how do you hear the mainstream voice, which, as Mark said at the beginning, is where the vast majority of our children with special educational needs are placed. The Youth Advisory Board or Youth Impact Board across some regions is the NHS board. And so how do you make sure that the young people from the Youth Inclusion Forum are finding their way into and their voices being heard on the Youth Advisory Board? And lots of different areas have got youth mayors, youth parliaments. So it's the ways that they've connected in with that. And I'll let Joe talk about that a bit more in terms of the going forward on the next slide. And another big thing that all the groups have been thinking about is how to strengthen that statutory part in terms of making sure that they are connecting in a really meaningful way with those statutory processes, which, as I said at the outset, was what this whole project's about. So we've had groups presenting more at the board. Sometimes they've put a video together. We've had other groups making sure that they have recruited a person at the local authority with the job description of youth voice to make sure that it's prioritised. So different people are thinking about the way, different groups are thinking about the ways they are strategising that. Next slide, please.
So as we move forward into the last meeting of this year's pilot and then into next year, we, as I said before, we really want the Youth Inclusion Forum to be youth led. It's their group, it's not ours. And as Harry alluded to there, we feel that this should be in a tiered approach. So what often happens within the local area groups is that all of the decision making is done by a small defined group, so that would be the tier 2 on the slide, but we want to make sure that wider voice is being heard, and maybe there needs to be some kind of advocacy sessions around what that looks like for young people, so that they're developing into that tier 2. Then you've got the tier 2 where that's kind of your core group of children, young people of maybe sort of 10 to 14 young people. And then in tier 3, that's when the young people would be joining that regional group when they're a little bit more used to that way of working and can advocate for themselves and for others within the group. And then Tier 4 would be for the mentors, so those over the age of 25 to really mentor younger members and crucially develop sort of CV building skills around that mentorship. And as I mentioned about CV skills, these groups need to be more than just pizza and social. We all love that, you know, food is the way to entice people in, but what are children and young people actually getting from these groups? What skills are they learning? What can they what does that mean for independence? What can they go on to do in the future? And as Harry's already mentioned, we'd really like our members of the Youth Inclusion Forum to be part of the kind of inclusive culture and find their way into different groups so that they can represent their local area and the regional forum within those groups, so that we have a wider network of understanding around what's going on within the region and within the locality. In February, we've got a peer review that looks at the lived experience for children and young people with SEND, and the forum have really been asked to co-lead that, so how that essentially local areas can talk about what they're doing in a way that's accessible and meaningful to children and people, and it really puts what they're doing at the heart of what the voice of children and people at the heart of what they're doing. We've also had to think about safeguarding. Obviously, we want to make sure everyone's safe, so these policies really need to be adaptable and clarify the roles and responsibilities of various parties within the forum and within the local area groups. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned, we're developing a co-production charter that will really develop our principles and will be able to lead and guide the forum members as to the behaviours that they want to see, and it will guide their work. To terms of reference, will really set out what the forum aims to do and how we aim to work. We've got a website in development that we really want the children and people part of our forum to lead on. So many of them are really creative. They write songs, they write poems, so all of that will go on the website as well, and that should be up sort of next year. And we'll be putting all of this work into an information booklet and a bit of a guide to for other areas if they want to set up something similar, and it will detail all of our learnings and what we've found along the way. I think, yeah, we're at the end of presentation, so if you've got any questions, feel free to ask.
Thanks so much to all of you. I really enjoyed sort of listening to that, and hopefully we'll hear more about the next step of development she spoke about as well. Diana, I can see you've come on camera, so did you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, this is brilliant work. So say who I am. I'm Diana Boyd. I'm family care advisor in the NHS England SEND team. But I was formerly chair of my parent carer forum, so I come from a parent carer forum background, so it's really interesting listening to this both from a kind of strategic level but also linking to parent carer forum world. And so I had a few questions actually. So the first one is, have you linked with other regional projects? So there's an NHS England funded project in the southwest, CHIPSA, which is a group, so that's NHS funded. So I just wondered if you've linked in with other work that's going on in other regions. So that's my first question.
Oh, do you want me to kick off, or do you want to speak, Jo?
That is one thing that we'll be looking to do moving forward, definitely. But this year has very much been about getting this one off the ground. We have linked with kids and UDC to sort of develop our understanding. But yeah, definitely we're keen to make connections elsewhere.
Yeah, so all my questions are not intended as challenge. I just want to make that clear because I do know this is such an area of growth. So it's more sort of thoughts that I'm having of going forward. So, and linked to that, I guess, is do you have any thoughts about? So I'm thinking about parent care forums and that, you know, they're funded via contact from the Department for Education. And one of the things we talk about and have talked about is, you know, what is the role in health funding for parent care forums, because that's done very much at on, you know, local level. Do you have any thoughts going forward about, you know, would it be useful, do you think, for youth forums to be funded joint, you know, what are the ways? Because of course, like families and parent carers, children and young people are accessing everything. It's not just school and it's not just health, and it's bringing it together. So I'm just wondering your thoughts about, and as you say, none of this is challenge, it's more just sort of thinking about next steps, is what do you have thoughts about how to make sure that the work the youth forums do is joined up, and by ensuring those who are funding it are also joined up, so linking with health specifically? That was a bit rambly, that question. But I'm really kind of, I'm sort of a slightly leading question is, how do we bring health and education together? You know, this is new with parent care forums. What can we learn from the way parent care forums have been set up for youth forums going forward, and how can we make sure we have worked together at national?
Yeah. So yeah, if I come in, Diana, on that one. So yeah, just to let you know, yes, we have at the moment we have a national participation team that's working on the kind of child and youth voice. So they are looking at different examples from across the country. So yes, and as part of the change program, we kind of we do a bit more. So obviously we're working with a set number of local authorities, but we kind of do look outward. East Midlands being probably a good example, because the Youth Alliance includes all of the local authorities in East Midlands, whereas we only actually work with 4 of them. 3, I think, Paul. Correct me. Yeah. So we are collating that information. And within DFE, we're having discussions about, because clearly we fund the parent carer side of things, and the change program itself has been funding regional kind of inputs on that as well. But that's additional. That's not something that's been done before. So we are looking at how we can make sure we can continue after the change program to support a regional PCF. Obviously, there are regional PCF reps, but this is going the next level down into kind of local authority areas. But also, how can we replicate that for the youth, the children youth voice? So hence why this program is really important for us to kind of test, learn, understand what the costs are, the benefits are, and that kind of thing. So we are, just to assure you on that, we are looking at that. The other thing, just to let you know, is clearly I think there's still a lot of work to do to bring education, health and care together. That's feedback we constantly get. There are a number of working parties at kind of a higher level, looking at how the departments particularly can work better together, particularly how can we make efficiencies and things more effective from a government point of view, looking through that local lens. So you'll know that the LSEC programme, for example, has been jointly funded by NHSE and DFE, which again, some of the not unintended consequences, but one of the values, I guess, that's been identified is that actually it does not force, but it does bring partners closer together in that collaborative kind of working together piece. So yeah, I think definitely kind of a joint funded type of structure is being thought through. So don't expect anything soon-ish, but because we've still got quite a lot to, this is not the only youth project we're looking at across the change program, but we'll be kind of gathering and kind of hopefully understanding, identifying principles, key points that we can then share with policy colleagues, and hopefully after that there'll be we'll be able to kind of define how that should look in the future, and obviously get that out when we can. So it is being thought about. We are collecting examples and kind of watch this space, but don't expect anything too soon.
No,
The
absolutely.
kind of
I just think
summary.
it's so
Is that all
brilliant
right?
that this is happening and it is being tested, but it is kind of a bit about learning from other areas and going from a policy perspective. Have I got time for one more question, or is it two?
Yeah, I think, yeah, we've got 4
And
minutes.
this is
left.
more
Yeah.
for the work on the ground and Joe, I think. So again, this is not a challenge at all. It's more something we consider in parent carer forums. And I think so this is a very much a youth-led approach, which is absolutely right. And noting the thing that's independent from parents and carers. In terms of engaging those wider groups, what about those young people who really do need someone to facilitate their voice, and often their parents and carers are the most. So what about those gaps that those young people who perhaps are going to find it difficult to join these groups? What thought have you given to particularly those who are non-verbal, I suppose, or have limited language? What are your thoughts around that?
I totally agree that that's a gap coming from a group myself. That's kind of how I found myself in this position. I recognise completely that that's a gap, and when we're talking about wider voice, it means wider voice of everybody and not just those people who find it easy potentially to share their opinions. But yes, that is something that we're working on. It's something that Jerry and I are really keen to make sure that we are fully representational. No particular thoughts right now as to the direction in which that will go, but it is completely on our radar and something that we're working to kind of bridge the gap towards.
Yeah, thanks. I think so. One of the things I think is it's always really important to be explicit about the gap, because when you're influencing, policy, which you absolutely should be, it's saying, perhaps even saying, our group doesn't represent that, so you need to make sure you're getting that voice from somewhere else, or or we are, or whatever your approach is. But it's naming it. I think that because it's really important that those young people, that their voices or their interests are represented in policy decisions. So I think it doesn't, we can't all do everything, but sometimes it's about naming where the gaps are. I think that's where I come from.
I think you're absolutely right, Diane, and it really speaks to it. I think what we've found at this outset point is that actually the groups are tending to be more, because of the way they're recruiting, tending to be more special skill focused. So I think their first thoughts have not been to that gap which you so rightly identify, but to actually a kind of a really big gap which is sitting there over the mainstream voice coming into those boards, and for example children on SEN support, whose voices are the largest proportion, but probably the ones that we don't think to go to first. So I think that's where we're heading, but as Joe said, very much on the list.
Yeah, no, brilliant. I mean, I just want to say I think it's absolutely fantastic and
thank you.
Really positive project. So yeah, none of these are challenges, they were just sort of thoughts, and which I know you're all aware of.
Well, you've got our email addresses from the front slide, so please feel free to get in contact. And Caroline, I've spotted your question or point in the chat. You know, we would love to connect out. If any of you are involved with groups that are similar or that you know of that we could have conversations with, we would be absolutely delighted to do that. So please reach out to us, email us. We'd love those conversations.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, everybody.